Hi guys, it's Kelly here and I'm back with another video. Today's video is a fun, crafty collaboration between Picket Studios and Pear Press. I am using both companies' products today. So I'm using lots from Picket Fence and then the one light. This actually has the easy light in there. I just put it in the wrong packaging. So you'll see when we get to the light portion of the card that I actually am using the one light from Pear Press. I'm also using the tree silhouettes. This is pretty similar to Picket Fence's Secret Garden cover plate, and I did a video with them where I did like a day and a night scene. I'll link to that at the end if you're interested in it, but this one's just slightly different and the opening's a little bit bigger, which was great because I also used the deer family, the grass tufts, and then later on I didn't even know I was going to use them. Oh, what are these? Wispy clouds, I think is what they're called. And then later on I'm going to pull out the tall grass and the grassy hill dye. What else did I use? There's the stencil. It is the Sun with Rays 6x6 stencil. So I went ahead and did all of my die cutting out of white. I am going to be ink blending all of my die cut pieces. But here's the thing. Oh, before we get into here's the thing, here's where I'm showing you the ones I didn't know I was going to use. Let's talk about the giveaways. Okay. So this is a crafty hop, which means each company is doing some giveaways. I believe it's like $25 gift cards. You just have to leave a comment as you make your way along the hop. And it's open through the 29th, March 29th, and they'll announce the winners on both of their blogs on March 31st. So let's talk about what we're doing. So I wanted there to be a background piece because the lights, the Pear Press lights, work better if they're diffused. And so I typically like to use them with vellum. But I had the idea for like the little deer family and the silhouettes and like the sunrise coming up behind them before I realized that I was going to have to find a way to hide the mechanism. And this card is different for me. If you're a follower of my channel, you know that this is not necessarily the type of card that I normally make as far as color palette or ink blending or really any of that. But it was a very, what is the word that I want? It was a card that taught me a lot. That's the way I'm going to say it. There was a lot of experimentation with this card to try to solve the problem that I had. And while I'm not sure that I 100% love the card in the end, I definitely love the lessons that it taught me because I learned some really cool stuff. So because I needed to diffuse the light, but I also needed to hide the mechanism, I knew that I wanted to incorporate vellum. But I didn't want the vellum to be white. I wanted that sun rays look of the sunrise coming up in the background. And so I started experimenting with different ways that I could color my vellum. Obviously, I started with white, and the pouncers, Picket Fence pouncers, actually ended up working really well with the oxides. I don't think it would work as well with regular distress ink. You might be able to try some other dye inks that you have, but because the oxides have pigment properties, they worked really, really well. And like pouncers normally are not for ink blending. They are for pouncing. They're for adding color to like more intricate dyes or through stencils. But because the vellum is a slick surface, they actually blended really nicely. And just by going over them a few times, and you can see I'm doing more of like a pounce and twist, like I'm pressing the ink into the vellum, it was able to not only stick, but dry there and stay. So this was a really, really fun thing to learn, and I will for sure be using it in another way. The other thing that I also learned is, you can build the color up on the vellum. So I started by adding the color to the backside because I was unsure if I was going to be able to get it to dry. And so I needed it to face the back of the card, but I was able to get it dry. So I could use either side. but while you're doing it, it isn't 100% dry. You know, the ink is still wet. You don't want to touch it with your fingertips because you'll lift the ink and you will 110% be able to see it from the other side. I did a practice piece, which I will show you guys, and you will be able to see where my fingerprints touched it. So instead, I just had a like a tissue. It was like dry paper towel, like what that I could use to touch the paper that wasn't going to leave fingerprints, or touch the vellum. That's what we're talking about. So here, the other thing that I also learned, now this is still the backside facing up because I'm not 100% sure that it's going to dry down. I could stencil on it. So I'm going to do the same thing, and because that color is buildable on top, you're still going to be able to see the stencil. Now, I'm going to be quite honest with you. In the final project in real life, you can see it. It's very subtle because of another technique that I did. But you almost can't see it at all in the photos of the project, which is really kind of a little bit sad because that really was, you know, the look I was going for was this kind of sunrise look. I do love the color combination. I went with a scattered straw, dried marigold, saltwater taffy, Victorian velvet, and seedless preserves, and I think it's a beautiful color combo, and I will for sure come back to it. But my original plan was to do the sunrise kind of in these colors, and then do the die cuts in their more traditional colors, like the deer would be brown, the grasses would be green, all of that. And I decided to do them all. Monochromatic is not the right word because that is like the same colors within a family. But basically, I just repeated the color combination that I chose throughout every aspect. Sometimes being darker, sometimes being lighter, sometimes using all the colors, sometimes not. And like I said, so this is different for me because normally I'm very detail oriented, and I like to go in and do all the little detail coloring. This isn't as detailed, but I do think that there is something about it. So here the stenciling is done. You can obviously see, you know, the rays are there. The interesting thing about it, I'm being very careful not to get my fingerprints on it. Now, for me, I can kind of touch the corner because I know that's going to be hidden by my cover plate. But if you were using this as a full piece, I would definitely be very careful around the corners. And when you're heat setting it, I would be very careful that you're constantly moving it. You're not setting in one place because you don't want to melt your vellum or warp it. So here's after I dried it. Here's the one that I did the first time, and you can see on the front there, you have two little fingerprints, and I tried to go back over and blend them out, and I could not. So the one on the left is with the color facing in the back. The one on the right was with the color, no, I'm sorry. The one on the left was the one with the color facing up, the one on the right. So it's actually darker when you flip it around. But that was a very interesting technique to learn, and it totally worked to color my vellum, which was my goal. So now we're going to get into the ink blending of the actual die cuts. And again, I'm just repeating the same colors. This sun is quite large. Like, we're not kidding anybody. It's a very large sun. But this is going to be what I hide my light mechanism behind. And for this, I only use the scattered straw and the dried marigold. You can see I'm kind of tapping off the extra ink before I go into the center. Do I think it even needed the dried marigold after the whole card was put together? Nah, probably not. Like, just being honest. And then for everything else, I am using that sun, which is going to be kind of in the middle of the tree silhouettes. I'm using that as my light source. So when I am adding the color to the grasses or to the deer, I am trying to think about where they're going to be positioned in the card. So how much light they're going to catch, or what areas of their body is going to catch the light. You can use the pouncers for this instead of the blending brushes. I just feel like I get a better blend, because pouncers aren't meant for blending and blending brushes are, and these are going to be on the forefront of my card. The other thing that I did was I switched from the oxides to regular distress inks. Distress inks, because they don't have that pigment property. They are a, more traditional dye ink. They are brighter, and they are more vibrant, which is what I prefer, and I wanted there to be a difference between the background and the foreground, and so that is why I chose to switch. But if you only have the oxides, you could do them in both, and I'm sure that it would be perfectly fine. While I was doing this, I very quickly realized that I should have flip-flopped the darker ones. I should have made these ones I'm doing now, I made them a little bit lighter. These should have been the darker ones, because they're the furthest away from the sun, where I ended up making the tall grasses over there in the back and that deer a little bit darker. But honestly, by the time it was all said and done, I was like, I'm not redoing it. It's going to be what it's going to be. It's close enough for government work, as I like to say, as somebody who worked for the government for almost 20 years. But going through, and in this one, in these like little grasses, I did use all of the colors, but here's a trick. You don't have to. I mean, not with this color combination. That's not true of all color combinations. But for example, blending the saltwater taffy with the scattered straw is going to give you an orange that's going to be pretty close to a dried marigold. So if you have a smaller die cut, you could skip that dried marigold. Same thing with the saltwater taffy and blending in the seedless preserves. It's going to give you an in-between color that would be sufficient to cut out the Victorian velvet. I'm just super kind of crazy with my dimension and my ink blends. So I wanted to make sure that they were blending the way that I wanted, but you'll see when we get back to I'm calling it the mommy and the baby deer. I did end up skipping some of them and just letting them blend on their own. Now, those little grasses in the front, I did end up going all the way out to black, but I did not make them as dark as I'm going to make this deer and these grasses. And that's just because I needed that dimension, that separation. I think that had I been paying better attention to my card design, which is on me 100%. I don't think that makes it an ugly card by any means. I don't think anybody's going to receive this card and be like, what is going on with the light source here? Like, I just don't think people think like that. I think only I think like that, because most of us are just our biggest critics, right? But had I done the hill, the darker color, and the tall grasses, the lighter color, and then done the tufts that were in front, also the darker color, I think there would have been a better separation, and I would like it more. Also, I was not prepared. I was not prepared for how much that scattered straw was going to make my little tufts look like hay, or like something like that. I just wasn't prepared for that. So I probably would have made them a bit darker to ease up on that yellow some. But again, I'm being super hyper critical of myself. And I think that all of us make cards that maybe aren't the ones that we're 100% comfortable with, but that is where the growing happens. That's where the stretching, the learning new skills, that's where you're going to get a different place than you are now, and that is by trying something different. And like I said before, do I think that this is the best card that I've ever made? No. Do I think it's a bad card? Also, no. If I thought it was a bad card, I wouldn't share it. I think that it is a pretty good one, and I learned a lot from it, and so that makes me happy. I think anytime you're a person who creates, whether it's card making or scrapbooking or painting or whatever, you're a creator by nature. You're just super hyper critical of yourself, and most people are not going to be that critical. So just give yourself grace and be kind to yourself and know when you're trying something different. Like right now, with my son. So he recently, we've cut down on screen time. I think I told you guys that in another video. And so we've been trying to come up with other ways. He asked me, let's go back to the card real quick. So I am sped this up because you've seen it like like 3 times now. But for the trees, because the sun is in the bottom center, almost that entire opening is going to be yellow, and it's going to get darker as it goes out. So that is what you see me doing there, as well as the mom and the baby deer. So anyway, so he's been trying to find other ways to fill his time. A really long time ago, maybe 9 years ago, I've always wanted to learn how to play the piano. And so after I had Peanut and I kind of lost myself in motherhood, I was trying to find something to do for myself. Honestly, and here I am 10 years later, kind of in the same kind of vibe, which is a whole nother story time. But anyway, I was trying to find something for myself. And so I decided that I was going to take piano lessons. And so on Saturday mornings, I would take an hour piano lesson. And I bought myself a keyboard so that I could practice at home. I have kept the keyboard. I did not end up keeping up the lessons just because of other things that were going on in my household at the time. This was during my first marriage. And so he asked me the other day if I would get the keyboard out for him. And I was like, okay, well, he's getting ready to head into middle school. And when I was a kid in middle school, you had general music, you had choir, or you had band. Like, those were your choices. You could pick any of them. I, of course, cannot carry a tune in a bucket. I could not play an instrument, so I took just general music just to get my credit and get it over with. Now, they require them to either play band, orchestra, or choir. There is no such thing as general music anymore. And so he had picked the trombone. But anyway, so he asked me about the keyboard. So I pulled it out, and he and I spent some time today, going over the keys so that he could learn what they were, and showing him some, tutorials that he could use during the time that he had his screen time available to him. And he was like, I told him, I was like, it's going to be hard because you're learning something new and you're going to get frustrated. But the more you practice a song, the better that you will get at it. So when you get frustrated and you just want to move on to another song, make sure that you try to come back to the first one, because you're only going to get better at it. And he has a really hard time sticking with things. And this is not every kid. Let's go back to the card for a second. So here, this is the technique that I did that kind of made it more challenging to see the stripes. But I wanted to add some shimmer to it, and so I sprayed it with some shimmer spray. You can see it curls up immediately as soon as we add that moisture. Now, you do need to take note, this is not on the side that we inked. This is on the other side that has no ink on it, because if I sprayed this on the side that I inked, it would mess it up immediately. Because distress oxides do react with any kind of moisture. So I kind of held it in place and hit it with my heat tool. Once I had dried it for just a little bit, I went back in with my towel and blotted up any excess moisture, and then I hit it again. It did leave a wonderful little sparkle that catches the light, and is super fun when the light is not being lit, that you can see it. So, anywho, he is not a child that has necessarily a lot of tenacity or stick-to-itiveness. It is challenging for him. And so that is why I gave him kind of the warning. But I was really, really proud of him. He tried, he played a long time today. And even though it's a learning curve, and even though he was getting frustrated with himself, and even though he had a lot of questions, he kept going with it. And just, it made me so super proud of him to see him put himself out there and work through his frustrations. And, just like, that's the same thing with us. Anytime you're trying to learn something new, you're trying to create something, like, you got to stick it out, because there's something wonderful on the other side, even if it's only the lesson. So what you saw me doing before is, if you are unfamiliar now, Pear Blossom Press has, I think it's called the best ever craft foam tape or something, and it is specifically sized to be the same width that you would need to hide your light mechanisms. Picket Fence also has really good foam tape. And one of the things that they have is the A2 sizes that are already cut. They're slightly smaller than A2, so you could just put them on on the backer and pop up the whole card. That's what you saw me using. And what I did was I trimmed them down into strips so that way I could put them around my frame, my cover plate, and pop up the vellum so that everything was sitting on top of my light mechanism and you weren't going to be able to see any of it. But trimming that into strips instead of, I also have the big roll, which I do like and I do use, but trimming it into strips was so much easier using the rectangles because they fit inside my my paper trimmer, so I could trim them straight. Here, you saw me kind of going back and forth. That's where I realized I definitely should have done them differently. I definitely should have put the darker one in the front. But I just rolled with it. I just went with it. Because it's all right. It's going to be okay. But for this to work, you do have to do all of the adhering of your die cuts kind of to the frame of it, because if you glue it to the back of the if you glue the vellum down to the card back, which is that, the one that we pounced first, you're not going to have any room for your mechanism, and there's not going to be anywhere for the light to be diffused. So the vellum needs to be attached to the top layer, but in the furthest back layer that it could possibly be. I hope that makes sense. So here I'm kind of figuring out where my sun is going to go. I realized pretty quickly that it was kind of up a little bit too high, but this is the one light. I'm messing around with it to see how far my sun needs to be up in order to hide that mechanism. And then once I figured that out, I just held it in place. I put a little bit of glue toward the bottom, put that down, and then got the top of it. And then I went ahead and trimmed off the excess sun and the excess grasses on both the cover plate and the vellum piece. Now, the clouds, I am going to adhere to the vellum because they're fine. The vellum is still going to be popped up, and it was just easier to adhere them to the vellum than it was going to be to adhere them to the frame. But because I was building this scene alongside the frame, that's why I chose to adhere my grasses and my deer directly to the frame so that they were going to stay where they wanted. This little bit of white, obviously they were shaded with purple, and I didn't even mention it, I apologize. When I shaded them, I didn't add anything to my blending brushes, I just used whatever was left over. And now here, we're going to glue this down to the vellum so that when we pop it up, we're popping up all of the die cuts and the vellum backer at the same time. So I'm just using liquid glue for that. And then this whole piece, like I said, we will pop up. Now, dependent upon where your light, like here you could see, can you see my little sun rays right through it? I think maybe it was a mistake doing the color in the background on the base level. Maybe it would have been easier to see if I had done a white behind it and not the same colors. I don't know, whatever. It is what it is. Once I got the light in the right place, I went ahead and traced it out so that I could put adhesive on the back of it and I would know exactly where to put it back. For my light to sit in the right spot. I'm just using some like rip and stick tape for that. It is a very strong, dry adhesive. So I put 2 little pieces of that on the back, and then I'm going to just line that right back up with my little outline and lay it over there, make sure everything works before I adhere anything down. Back to what I was saying about the foam tape. So this one I cut at like 1/8 of an inch, so it's pretty thin. And at first, I was like, oh man, I didn't leave enough room to work around the mechanism. So that is my warning. If your mechanism is up against the edge of your card, you're going to need to leave a gap for it because it does have some width. But because mine is only 1/8 of an inch and my mechanism is up a little bit higher behind that sun, I was actually able to use a full piece and didn't have any issues. I'm only going to put this around the back because I don't want to interfere with the vellum, but I am going to give myself some anchor points behind the dies. So behind the clouds and then behind the large body of the male deer, I'm pretty sure that's the male deer anyway. I think so. But I'm just going to give myself some anchor points so that way it isn't totally just loose in the center. And then once I remove those, I can go ahead and line them up to the backer, which will essentially complete the light portion so that it works and lights up the little sun rays. Now, the little tufts of grass are meant to go into the front just to kind of create some more interest. Again, I know I'm repeating myself. I wish I would have made them darker, but it was what it was. Accept it, Kelly, and move on. So these ones I just did, I just picked 3 of the sizes. They're in the Tufts dies. There are quite a few different sizes. And these are great if you love like scene building. They have lots of different ones that you can use to build your scenes. Now from here everything is done as far as design except for the sentiment. So I was going kind of back and forth about what to do, and then I remembered this is that daisy down there is actually my newest set from Picket Fence, that we had 2 sentiments in there that included the word brighter. So this one says you make my day brighter, and then there's another one that says brighter days ahead. Either one of those would have totally worked for this, but I really liked the kind of encouragement and kindness of you make my day brighter. So for the sentiment, in order to get it to stand out, but also to tie in those white clouds, I decided to do some white heat embossing, and then I did ink blending on top of it. Something very important to note. I did my embossing first because Distress ink is designed to stay wet longer so you can emboss with it. So if you do your ink blending first, you need to heat set it or let it dry for quite a bit of time and then double check it with your embossing powder before you do your stamping, because it will stick for real. If you do it right away, it will stick. I know. If that was also another lesson on another day, that was a hard one to learn. But anyway, so after treating with my anti-static tool, I stamped it in pigment ink and then used white detail embossing powder. I'm going to cut it out with its coordinating dies. And then I did use the same colors, just slightly darker. I went with they are the same colors, but I just went with the darker combination so that it would kind of stand out. And then I went ahead and adhered them flat onto the card because it is already popped up to make room for that light mechanism. And then, of course, because, we all need some more shimmer and shine and bling and all that jazz, I accented the sentiment with some rhinestones from Picket Fence. This is the one, I just keep using it, even though I don't even really like purple that much, y'all. It's the purple side of the rainbow, I think is what it's called. And then I did use a clear shimmer pen to add shimmer anywhere that there was yellow. This is something you need to be careful with because you can move the ink. I also added it to the clouds, but that's just because I like extra shimmer. The card's perfectly fine without it. And then here you can see all of that shimmer. And then I'm going to turn off my desk lamps, like my studio lamps, so that you can see it in the dark. Like how much it's so much brighter. It reminds me of the Lion King, honestly. Like like that the sun rising. And if you've seen the Lion King as many times as I have, you're already singing the song in your head. I'm not going to sing it now because, as previously stated, I can't carry a tune in a bucket. But anyway, that's the whole card. I hope that it inspired you to maybe try something different, one of these techniques. Please continue along the hop. Like I said, it's open through the 29th. Thank you so much for your time. I always appreciate it, and I will catch you guys on the next video. Bye.